And welcome to Trip to the Mound. We are the iBaseballChannel podcast. Roy Giovanoni, also known as Furniture sometimes, joined as always by Mr. Mike Lacoste. And we're cutting right to it. Of course, we're doing a lot of forecasting towards the end of the season. We're looking at not only the teams that are making their way towards the playoffs, but I think one of the more interesting discussions is something that we notice maybe once every 10 years if we're lucky. And again, it's this discussion as to whether a pitcher is worthy of the MVP vote. And of course, we obviously know who we're talking about, and he resides in the National League, pitches for the Dodgers. And
it's one of those rare years, though. It's kind of coming together where the teams and the races and the individuals, and that are involved. So
yeah, and before we get too far into the numbers, let me just ask you this from a pitcher's perspective. How do former players feel about that?
Well, the hitters are always going to say the pitchers don't deserve it because they only play once every 5 days, and that so forth and so on. But the reality is there are certain occasions where that pitcher, and all the other planets line up, and it can happen. But for the most part, they don't. And most of your people that I believe that do the voting, they like to see that everyday player that plays the whole year and has that box to wire type season, and the team gets in the playoffs, and I'm sure that's the what you're looking for. But
well, and again, so then when you do have these instances, and again, we're looking at about once every decade or so, or roughly, you have these guys that break the mold, a la Bob Gibson and Denny McLain in 1968, Vida Blue in 71, Roger Clemens in 1986, guys like this. What do you think in those instances propelled those guys to, again, you say that most of the time people look at it and say it's a hitter's award to win, but what are those pitchers doing in these cases that's making them most valuable player?
Well, they are, number one, sending the kind of message where it's almost automatic that if you don't score off them in the first couple innings, you can forget it. That's the big overall impression when you're on the field from one dugout to the other. And believe me, they know that, they're aware of that.
Yeah.
People know that. And of course, what goes along with that numbers-wise is these are guys that are completing a lot of games or taking their team into the latter part of the innings, which saves the bullpen, and they're getting the big numbers up. And then again, it's just and the team has to win, I think, which is probably a given, for the most part. But pretty much that, it's that lights out factor where it's almost automatic, where a team, where you can look at the team and evaluate it and put the pieces together and come out with that kind of a decision.
Yeah, and again, before we get into the current discussion at hand, when you look at these guys, you look at Bob Gibson in 1968, 22-9, 1.12 ERA, 268 punch-outs. Denny McLain, same year, 31-6, 1.96 ERA, 280 strikeouts. Vida Blue in 1971, 24-8, 1.82, 301 strikeouts. And Roger Clemens in 86, 24-4, 248, 238 Ks. Again, the numbers all kind of speak for themselves. And then again, we fast forward, and of course, Justin Verlander in 2011, again, another one of these dominating performances. And we fast forward to this year, looking at where Clayton Kershaw stands at this point. Again, that 17-3 record is very impressive, but it's even more impressive when you consider the guy's only had 23 starts. So there's only 3 non-decisions in that whole mixture of how he's throwing so far this year. And of course, then beyond that, 1.70 ERA, 202 strikeouts, and only 169 innings pitched. And then, of course, one of these newer stats that's come about in the last couple of years, the WHIP. Walks and hits per innings pitched, and he's lower than any of these other guys that have won the MVP in the past from a starting pitching perspective.
Yeah, the WHIP is kind of a byproduct, though, or forces the other issue. In other words, if you have a good WHIP, meaning you're facing less hitters per inning, that's allowing him to go deeper into these games, which I believe we looked up when you asked me a couple of questions this morning, as you always do, and we look into the crystal ball over here at the iBaseball channel, come up with some competent answers, and the real answer is he's going deep, over 7 innings.
7 1/3 is
Seven
what
and
his
a third
average
innings.
is. Yeah.
So that means that on an average, the bullpen on his team has to get 5 outs. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Because every out, as you get, at the end of the game, gets tougher and tougher. And so that in itself is where you start looking, and then you start looking at all the other numbers and the situation the club is in, them being the front runners now, and and so if he continues to add to these already overwhelming stats, then it's going to take an epic performance from some of the other individuals that we looked at.
Yeah.
That we'll elaborate on as we get deeper into the discussion here
Yeah.
today.
But and again, you said one of the most important things to take into consideration with this is the winning factor. Again, all the guys that have been attached to this and the prior have had a team that's at least gone to the World Series within that year, so they've been very instrumental. You off camera had mentioned some of the other great performances of lefties within the past 40 years. You talked about Steve Carlton in 72 when he was 27-10, 1.97 ERA. But unfortunately, that made up, and I think the statistic was 46% of the Phillies' total wins that year. So that's not a guy that you're going to propel into this MVP discussion. Same with even as amazing as Ron Guidry in 78, 25-3, 1.74 ERA. But again, there were other factors to this. When you look at the Dodgers' success this year on a whole, and you look at the fact that they've never been able to maintain a sizable lead over the Giants in that division, it looks like each one of his starts and each one of Kershaw's starts in that equation is big to where they stand at this point.
Right, and he is for real, right? He was the best pitcher in the game last year, and now he's showing it again. And so they're looking at the scenario of, okay, does he have more to accomplish? Is he deserving of these kind of a little bit bigger of an award, which
Joined as always by
if they're
Mr.
talking
Michael
about
Goss.
it, then they must be considering it.